welcome to this video. My name is Hedwig Hertle. I am a retired pastor and the son of the missionary couple Hedwig Hertle and Hedwig Hertle. My father was the first Lutheran missionary to enter the Viru area, and I am here to tell you the story. This video is number 6 and carries the title The First Contribution of My Mother. Tiripini was a busy place, and my mother played an important role to keep the station running. She considered her foremost responsibility to care for the sick and injured in the dispensary and later in a small hospital. She looked after the guests who frequently passed the station. Every Monday she had a class of Sunday school children and women to whom she gave Bible lessons. By the end of the year 1962, she regularly had 100 children in the Sunday school. She taught the Bible stories that had been the Bible lessons of the past Sunday. Household work was left to the two household girls who were responsible for cleaning and cooking. Later she did literacy work and translations, which I will describe later. In the first days, her main work was to tend to the sick. A dispensary had been built for the outpatients right from the very beginning. My mother had been treating the sick in Yalibu and knew that the people would be expecting her to render medical help in Tiripini too. What surprised her was the fact that many stretcher cases came. It became necessary to care for patients who had to be treated for longer than one day. In March 1962, a small hospital had been built of bush material. It was designed in such a way as to separate men and women and also enemies from each other. Each compartment had a separate fireplace. Patients slept on woven pit beds. The hospital was designed in such a way to suit the local housing style so that patients and their relatives who cooked for the sick would feel at home. In December 1961, my mother recorded 1,000 patients with sores and 700 other patients, mainly with influenza and respiratory problems. She was working up to 6 hours a day in her hospital. In order to cope with a large number of cases, she needed assistance. During the holidays, my brother Walter took the records of each patient. My mother made the diagnosis. My sister and Yoga handed out medication. On normal days, Purupo was her assistant. Later, my mother built a maternity ward as the number of deliveries continued to grow. To complete the small hospital, she also included a laboratory. She had never planned to erect a hospital, but she adjusted the building to meet the needs that arose on the spot. Fatal cases always occur in hospitals, but by the grace of God, during all that time, my mother never had one fatal case while she was in charge. The picture shows a family that was released from hospital as healed patients. Some cases were more complicated. In that same month, a father brought his daughter, a young woman, Kalome, to my mother. She had high fever and was suffering from pneumonia. My mother gave her a strong dose of penicillin and put her to bed and visited her several times during the first night. The patient was delirious and speaking incoherently. My mother gave her medication to strengthen the heart. In the morning the fever left her, but then she had a severe attack of chills. She clung to my mother and had cold sweat on her forehead and showed signs of approaching death. The fever rose again, and my mother administered a further doses of penicillin and heart medication. In the afternoon, an aircraft dropped a parcel of medicines from the hospital of Yagaon. Included was a new medication, Tiripini, that my mother had not ordered. Immediately, she administered it to her patient. The next day the fever went down, but the patient was still very weak. Now the father approached my mother, requesting her to take her daughter into the spirit house and allow her to die, because he did not see any hope for her. But now my mother knew that she would survive and was able to give the father the good news. Some day later, Colome was able to leave the hospital. She was the second patient in that hospital. My mother gave thanks to God. By the end of March 1962, she had had 110 patients in that hospital. It was obviously serving its purpose. My mother never tried to deal with cases that exceeded her ability. Such cases were flown out to other hospitals with a better capacity. But sometimes she had to deal with such cases. One day, a woman was brought to her on the verge of giving birth. But my mother was not able to make a diagnosis. She requested the woman to be transported to Yalibu. The Kia had consented at first, but then decided otherwise. My mother stayed with the patient all night and called assistance shortly before the birth. At 2 a.m., a woman gave birth to twins. Yoga held the first child in his arms. My mother wanted to give the second child to the mother, but she decidedly refused. "This child must be killed," she said. The father, who was also present, confirmed the opinion of the mother. My mother had to take the child in her arms. When my mother eventually went to bed at 4 a.m., she was puzzled why the second child should have been killed. She learned later that it was a customary tradition to kill the second child of twins. This child would be the first one to survive that tradition. To avoid double treatment, my mother always asked if the patient had received treatment from someone else. One day, a young worker was brought to her and said he had received treatment from a traditional healer. My mother asked him what the healer did. He told her that the healer laid him down on a banana leaf. He then sucked the spot of pain, and out came a tooth of a pig and a small twig. My mother said a translator nearly believed the trick. The twig could also be interpreted as a twine, which could point to the lifeline that connects each individual to his creator and sustainer of life, Akolali, indicating that the lifeline had been damaged and was now being repaired. Then my mother asked what he had paid for the treatment. He said he gave him an axe. Traditional healers often demand a pig offering when the spirits were called to give healing to the sick. This picture shows a traditional pig sacrifice in a spirit house, but medical treatment at Mother's Hospital was free of charge. She received drugs from a Lutheran hospital in Yagaon and from the medical assistant in Yalibu. Other costs had to be covered by the station budget. Her patients came from all parts of the area. Even the government sent members of the police force for treatment. Then a very odd thing happened. On the 22nd of August, 1962, 5 high medical officials came to visit my mother. The high official from Mendi, the government doctor from Goroka, the government doctor from Mendi, the local Kiap, and Mr. Coat, medical assistant from Yalibu.
"Gracious lady, how is it possible that you are here performing medical activities on such a large scale without my knowledge in Goroka, and just recently the official in Mendi heard about it?" My mother answered that she had lived here in Pangaea before the government had even built a station, and she had just helped the people as they came to her. "But gracious lady, then you need to have some sort of diploma or identification. You cannot expect the government to accept mission work without an adequate certificate."
My mother took her diplomas out of the drawer. A very good, from the University Clinic of Erlangen, issued by the doctor of Hungary. And the examination as midwife from the University of Tübingen, a straight A, very good. The officials were obviously impressed. "Please do not misunderstand me. We are very satisfied with your excellent work, but we are considering to erect a government hospital here, and it would not be good to have a Lutheran hospital here too. Please do not consider to erect a permanent hospital building."
My mother answered that there was no need to worry about that. She was the only white person here, and she could easily invest her time and energy in other fields such as teaching. The answer came very quickly. "Gracious lady, please don't do that. Keep on with your good work." It was obvious that the officials were at first very skeptical about my mother's qualifications, but then seemed to be relieved that mother was doing such good work, as she was actually rendering public health service, which would have been the obligation of the government. Now they had gained time to carry out their plans. 3 months later, in November 1962, a new medical assistant took over office in Yalibu. One of his first official acts was to inform my mother that he would no longer deliver medicine to her hospital. Patients were to be brought to Yalibu to be treated there. My mother knew too well this would not work out. She closed down her hospital and started to clean her house. When the Kia of Pangaea heard about that, he was enraged. Immediately he went to Yalibu, spoke to the new medical assistant, and wrote notes to the district commissioner in Mendi and Goroka. The answer came straight away. Both of them regretted the matter and requested my mother to continue with her work. By the end of the year 1962, when my mother had added a laboratory and a maternity ward to her hospital, she not only saved the lives of many people in the region, but also strengthened their trust in God, as the people begin to understand that the traditional rituals and the spirits would not give healing.
My parents had an open house for all visitors, and Tiripini station had many visitors. Even the families of the Bible mission called in to sleep for a night. On one occasion, a family with 6 children came. Somehow my mother managed to find enough beds to put them up. People from all walks of life called in, government officials as well as mission personnel and teachers from the coast. Her guest book reads like a who is who of the highlands of that time. The first entry was Ron Hyatt, the census collector, dated on the 27th of June 1961. The very next entry was made about a month later by the responsible Kiap, Brian O'Neill, who was a very capable official. He was to become the father of the Honourable Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Peter O'Neill. Directors and bishops were visitors as well as friends and mission personnel. Very frequent visitors was the family Harland Kerr, the SIL linguist and anthropologist, who were close neighbours and friends. When visitors came, my mother did the cooking herself, and only the very best was put onto the table.
My mother constantly suffered from the fact that she could not give her children as much attention as they deserved and needed. This was very evident in the case of my younger sister Adelheid, particularly when she lived in Yarriboer. Very often she was left to the care of the household girls. When all her children were sent to boarding schools and then came back home on holidays, she had to work in hospital due to epidemics which generally occurred at that time, instead of spending time with them.
When they left after holidays, she escorted them to the creek Wiwe and waved them goodbye until they were out of sight. She turned back home with a heavy heart. She was torn between the love towards her children and the faithfulness toward her patients. When the airstrip was officially opened, the farewell scene of my family changed too. This was a typical picture that all missionaries and their children would never forget. The picture shows the very friendly and cheerful pilot Ray Jensch, who is loved by all, together with my brothers and sisters. Later he suffered a fatal plane crash, a very big tragedy. Missionary parents and their children were separated in early age, and each lived in different worlds respectively.
Letters could not bridge the gap between the different worlds. Some were able to cope with differences better than others, but all of us paid a price, some more and some less. This was part 6 of a series of 15 videos. If you are interested in learning more about it, I would be happy to welcome you to the next part. Number 7 is called Entering the South Part of the Beary Area.
Cheerio.
Cheerio!